Islam. Allahumma ameen. So now, alhamdulillah, we've come to 30 plus ahadith. And as we come to the close, I want everyone to always contemplate. We're going to begin and end this way. What have you gained from these ahadith we've been covering? Are they actual ahadith for everyday living? Do you refer to them in your everyday living? Do you see the utility that they provide for all around being Muslim in general? And today we're taking a little bit of a break from that series to explore the topic of the month, it being Pride Month, right? This is something that a lot of people will encounter at work, at school, in the society at large. So what is the Islamic navigation through all of this? So I'm going to be your coworker, as we always say, or your friend, your colleague, a student maybe in school, and I say, hey, you're one of those Muslim people, right? What is the deal with Islam and LGBT? Give me a 2-sentence breakdown. You have 2 minutes. Do you need an answer? So it's not rhetorical. I'm asking, do you need one? Do I have to have a to-go-to 2-minute, 5-sentence breakdown of Islam's take on LGBT? You say I don't need one. Okay? Why? It's a discussion. It's very low stakes. There's no punishment. And there's no right or wrong answer. So you said, no, I don't need that to go to answer. We'll come back to you, no pressure. Go ahead, Ruqayya. I mean, there's tons of pressure now that I put it on you, but low stakes. So it's not bad. Not bad answer, but it's a little rambly. Like it's a little bit long and extended. And it's not very structured. Like I said, the purpose is not to put anyone on the spot, but just to analyze. So we have one brother who says he doesn't think you even need an answer. Then Ruqayya, you have your answer, which is not bad, technically speaking, but in terms of structure, it's definitely lacking. And it's a bit rambly. So rambly means like it just sounds like you're shooting off the cuff. Like you're just sharing my thoughts. It's not really something I've thought about, or it's something that maybe I don't have a structured answer for. It just kind of. So these are like my takes so far. Anybody else? Yeah, Amir. So I like what Amir said, which is at the very basics, you need to have a answer before we discuss what the answer is, or the correct one, or the best one. You must have an answer because number one, if someone were to ask you and you don't have it, they'll assume that Islam either doesn't have the answer to this issue. It's a societal issue that it never addressed and never figured out, while the rest of the world is obviously struggling with it. Or they'll just assume that you yourself are clueless. What does Islam say? Don't ask Muhammad. He has no idea. Yeah, his name is Mohammad and he claims to be a Muslim. We see him do that stuff that they do. But when it comes to actually knowing about his religion, he's clueless. I asked him and he said, no, leave me alone. Ask me about sports or something else. So he straight up told me that he has no idea about this, but he knows about other things. Both of these are horrible conclusions. For them to conclude that Islam doesn't have the answer, it's a disaster. For them to conclude that it might have the answer, but definitely not with you, it's a disaster on your part. Because maybe on the day of judgment, the scenario will look like, why did you do this? This was forbidden. I worked with this Muhammad guy for 15 years. He never said anything. Right? This stuff was important. He gave no indication that this was the purpose of life. It looked like some kind of side quest for him. He'd do Islam sometimes. Once a year, he'd stop eating. But that's the extent of what we knew about Islam from him. So Allah turns to you now. Why was this the only bit of Islam that they ever saw? How come they struggled with all these conflicts and questions? Yeah, maybe it wasn't your job to solve them all, but why did you offer nothing? Right? That's a bigger problem. How come they can stand here in front of me on the day of judgment and plead, oh Allah, my excuse is 30 years of this sister, of this brother, sharing a street with me, sharing a block, sharing a workstation, seeing my questions, and never having an answer. So this is important. More important than other people's for yourself. Remember, guys, I always tell you that doing that for others, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim and you want them to become Muslim, Muslim and you want them to come closer, all that comes second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th after your own faith. Your own faith, is it in jeopardy? If you say no, if you don't feel so, that's the reddest of flags. If you yourself feel, look, no, my faith's okay. There's no red flags. Not that because of some special sin you're performing, but this is just the nature. Faith is a very fickle thing, and it's always under attack. So if you don't feel that, if you're not aware of that, then you're probably already a casualty, a walking casualty, and you don't even realize it. So how is it fair that Islam will, for example, this is like for the faithful, those who have faith now, this is the way the questions will come to you. How is it fair that Islam will demonize a group of people, a huge section of the society, for something that they cannot choose? Something that they themselves, do you choose to be the skin color that you are, the gender that you are? You didn't choose that. So they didn't choose it likewise. How can Islam demonize them and vilify them? So forget about give me a summary of Islam and LGBT. Now I'm coming at you with this question. I heard that it's haram to be a homosexual in your faith. How's that fair to a group of people who had no choice in this preference of theirs or their struggle? What's the answer? Yeah, Adam. What about the story of Lut? So, sure, maybe that's an argument we can have, but the question is, if they're just born like that, right? This is not a choice that they make. How would it be fair to demonize them and vilify them? Say what they're doing is evil and they're evil people. What do you mean they're born like that? Go ahead, Sierra. What was the second part? Just like the choice of what? Sure, that many of us can choose to do something haram and choose not to, but this is a lot different than telling somebody don't do this evil, harmful act and you will never find love in your life, ever. You'll never get married. You'll never have a spouse. It's a lot different between these situations. So, just to get started, because this will take a while, but I'd love to sit down and just hear your thoughts for an hour or two straight, to check if you have them. Check if you have ever considered these questions and these answers. Because if in your mind this is what it looks like, this tumbleweed, right, Wile E. Coyote chasing the Roadrunner scene, if it's empty, that's what I'm trying to say, there's nothing going on regarding this topic, forget about da'wah to others. You yourself are in jeopardy. Your own faith is at stake here. Because your one calamity or catastrophe or story or public, scandal away from wondering, wait, why does Islam teach this? Wait, this isn't fair. This doesn't make sense. I never thought the answer for this. And then that's it. That's the chink in the armor. That's the crack in the bedrock that should have never happened. And 6 months later, 6 years later, one sickness or lost child or failed business or whatever, God forbid, later, the faith disassembles. It dissolves because it was never really there to begin with. So these questions are important. People might, if you're sitting here thinking, well, I'm not LGBT, so I don't need this, then this is, you're I don't want to say you're in for a big surprise because you're LGBT. That's possible nowadays. But what I mean is you're in for a big surprise when you realize how much you need this information. when it comes either, God forbid, for yourself, a catastrophe of faith, or a loved one, which happens all the time. So that's the purpose of what we want to do today, is explore these questions and find the answers. Does our faith have the answers? So it's going to be brief just because it's a long topic, but feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. Let's go to the first slide. So a breakdown of how we want to look at it is first our religious narrative. What is the narrative that Islam teaches? It's a comprehensive one. It's a very simple one. And it's something that you should have as a to-go-to answer at like the back of your hand. With anything. You're a walking dawah project. You have a responsibility, like I was saying earlier, where these non-Muslims or these Muslims of weak faith will use you as an excuse on Day of Judgment, and to some extent, it's valid. It's not, no, that's absolutely nonsense, it's your responsibility, go away. There's a good chunk of it that's individual responsibility. But there's a good chunk of the accountability that will say, okay, you're right, you. How come you never did any da'wah to them whatsoever? How come you saw them doing haram and never said anything? How come you saw them struggling and never helped? There's some level of responsibility there. So, but again, more importantly is for yourself, not necessarily da'wah to others, but for yourself and others. The whole point was there has to be that sentence. When I get a question about how we dress, what we eat, sexuality, how we spend our money, why does Islam anything? There's always this to go to answer in the beginning, the religious one. And then there's other arguments that, depending on the amount of time and the audience and how much interest there is, we'll get into some of this stuff about the history and whatnot. But that to go to answer in the beginning is yours and you need it primarily. So we're going to explore that. Then we're going to look at where did this come from. That's important as well. Because like I was telling you with the previous questions that we did last week and all the other times that we do this, a lot of times the way that I ask the question is purposefully loaded to make it more difficult, to increase the difficulty in you answering and you being comfortable. Maybe I can put doubt in your mind. Why not? It's not that hard if you don't come equipped. So just very simply, as you said, Dunya, what was the question? You asked a question. You asked a question in response to mine. What do they mean, what? So right away, that's a premise you should challenge. What do you mean it's no choice? What do we mean by that, right? That's a premise that you should challenge. I didn't challenge it in my question. I pretend it's a fact. I pretend that's something that's for certain. And if you don't challenge that, you're now forced to defend something that who said it was a fact in the first place. So the fact that that's easily done on you is not a good thing. And it'll be easily done on you in some topic or the other, right? You're not a genius in everything. There can only be one of those, right? But the more you know about one topic, the less likely someone will be able to do that on you, and you're confident in your Islamic narrative of everything, not just this topic. So a brief history to see where that comes from, to be able to navigate that better, something to do specifically about Muslims struggling with this issue, what does Islam say about that, and then just general societal issues. So you can go to the next slide. So the Islamic narrative is a very simple one. This is not much going on here except something for you guys to look at. I wanted to put more pictures. You didn't get the chance, I can send this to you. Make it your own, why not? So the Islamic narrative is primarily told and simply told in the story of Prophet Lut alayhi salam. Prophet Lut alayhi salam is sent to a group of people, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, in addition to their disbelief, which is always the number one order of business, disbelieving in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not living a life that's purposefully submitting to Him, He highlights their main sin, which is, إِنَّكُمْ تَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ, you approach evil doing, you approach immorality, vulgarity, that's what fahishata is, and in a way that no one has done before you. مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. You're introducing an evil fahisha that no one else has done before, that people have not done before you. إِنَّكُمْ لَتَأْتُونَ الرِّجَالَ وَتَقْطَعُونَ السَّبِيلَ وَتَأْتُونَ فِي نَادِيكُمُ الْمُنْكَرِ. You lust after men, you waylay the travelers, so they are highway robbers. It's a certain road that people pass by on their way somewhere. They stand by this road, and you don't pass by until you pay them a portion of what you have or a tax, right? Similar to like what they do today in customs and things like that. But this was just individuals doing it. Not that governments doing it is okay, but that's a separate topic. So you waylay the travelers, you lust after men, and you commit evil in your open gatherings. So they had open gatherings, and this is where they would commit this immorality. It wasn't hidden, it was out in the open. Their only response was, bring about the punishment of Allah if what you say is true. It's not a long story. The story of the people of Lut He simply comes and he preaches to them. They refuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends him the angels in the form of beautiful young men. They insist on getting access to these young men. He holds them off as long as he can until they reveal themselves as angels, and they demand that him and his people, him and his children and his wife, his family, leave the city. You can go to the next slide. So, as the ayat tell us, and this is just a handful of ayat, you'll find a bunch more on the same story, that when they refused and they go back and forth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands him to exit the city. He leaves with his family, except for his wife, who argued on behalf of these people, who supported them, who was trying to give them access to Ibrahim alayhi salam's guests, these angels. Everybody else is saved and they leave. She turns around and witnesses their punishment and is caught along with it as well. So this is the summary of the story of Lut alayhi salam. Very brief, right? It's not a very long story. And the summary of it, the conclusion is what? Same as every prophet, believe in Allah alone without any partners. This is the purpose of life. This is why human beings exist. And a big part of your sinful lifestyle that goes against the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to live is your sexual preference, is the way that you engage in this immoral sexual act. So that is a summary in brief. Next slide. So when it comes to Islam, briefly speaking, this ayah governs everything. قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَنُسُكِي مَحْيَا وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ وَبِذَلِكَ أُمِرْتُ وَأَنَا مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, my prayers, my rituals, my sacrifice, my living and my dying, all belong to Allah, alone without any partners, the Lord of the worlds. This is what I have been commanded with, and I am the first of those who submit to Allah. So here it says my prayer and my sacrifice to highlight physical rituals that you see. You're going to see me engage in physical rituals, washing my hands, praying at a certain time of day, facing a direction, following certain actions and words in my prayer. That's ritual prayer. And then, mahyaya wa mamati, my living and my dying, the way that I do everything else belongs to Allah. This is what Islam means. This is an important standing point, because anywhere that I go afterwards, then I'm going to run into the arguments that people say, which is, if God is so powerful and so great and so beyond mankind and food and drink and benefit, why does he care who you have relations with? You guys ever hear that argument? Like, you guys make God sound so grand. Why does he care about something so petty and so like weird and intimate? Then you're like, just because the way that the statement is phrased, now you're stuck in the defensive. Like, oh man, I feel weird that we care about that. You're stuck into this defensive statement that's a stupid statement to make. That's the real answer, right? The real answer is my living, my dying, and every fabric of my being, every atom in existence belongs to Allah. And because of the faculties he gave me that he gave no other creation of hearing and sight and intellect, some of us have it, not all of it, but to the extent that we categorically have this as human beings, we have a greater responsibility. So he tells us how to do everything. That's my paradigm. So for you to feel defensive from the other paradigm, that, oh no, that does sound weird. Why do we care what happens between closed doors? That all on its own, as a starting point, is already a point of weakness. It's a point of concession, conceding to the points that these people make. So all of this, by the way, is prepared in this fashion, highlighting these points, even if I don't bring it up, but feel free to jump in at any time with a question that you hear about the particular point or in general. So just to begin, as a Muslim, when it comes to things like sexuality, how I dress, how I eat, how I speak, how I interact in business, all of that stems from my deen. Why? Because of this verse. That I believe all of it is worship. That's what Islam is. That's what it means to submit to Allah. It doesn't mean how I pray or how I give zakah or certain rituals. It means all of it. So that's going to include inevitably sexuality, romance, and things of that nature, because all of it falls in line with this revelation, with this way of life. The next slide is empty. It's not supposed to be, but we have the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, for example, that وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. So those who guard their private parts. Go to the next slide. Does it show up on yours? It does. Strange. There's supposed to be an ayah here as well. It's not coming on my end, but that's okay. So Islam teaches us that the pious people, the righteous people, they safeguard their private parts. Meaning they don't engage in sexual acts. He left it blank. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they safeguard their private parts. Period. Then the exception is إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُم, except with their spouses or what their right hands possess. Meaning outside of this relationship, all other sexuality is haram. Islam makes it simple. Those who guard their private parts, meaning they don't engage in any activity regarding them, except with their spouses. Everything else is impermissible. So anything that doesn't fall into this category of intimacy between spouses is haram. The Prophet ﷺ told us that they're only sanctioned between a man and woman, right? That he specified further that is something that's only between a man and woman, that we don't believe in the validity of same-sex relationships, intimacy or otherwise. So in general, the Islamic overview is that sexuality is a component of life like everything else, and our lives are governed by Islam just like everything else. And when it comes to sexuality, it limits it between husband and wife, man and woman. Right? That's a brief overview. So anything outside of that, such as zina, doesn't even have to be just same sex, but zina, relationships outside of marriage, intimacy with someone you're not allowed to be intimate with, right? Like a parent or a sibling. All of that falls under fahisha in Islam, immoral sexual activity, of course with different levels of severity depending on what we're discussing. Any questions so far? So what is the Islamic take on LGBT? Now I'm asking you. They didn't make LGBT just yet. Well, it's definitely it's in the works. Sure. So we're getting there. That's towards the end. But that's kind of the whole point of all this, by the way, guys. Someone comes up to you, do you support LGBT? What does that mean? This is how I answer it. As you could tell, I don't have a lot of conversations with people. Like within a few minutes, people are going to walk away. They're saying, okay, I don't need this whole breakdown. I don't care. So then you don't care. You don't care enough about my answer. And you probably don't care enough about the subject itself where you're not willing to hear a few-minute answer, right? This isn't us breaking it down and me asking you questions will take us a little bit over an hour. But this entire presentation, I can do it in 5 to 10 minutes because it's a prepared answer and I can lengthen it to an hour, I can lengthen it to 2. So we're getting to that at the end, respecting others and interacting with them, and that is a part of it. But that's kind of the whole point of why I'm doing it this way. I refuse to be pigeonholed into answering the question one way or the other. Do you support it? Are you okay with it? Let's have this conversation in a way that breaks it down and adequately answers the question and why is it an issue. Outside of like these buzzword style of do you support, are you against, which doesn't really say much. So that's what the whole purpose of this is. Go ahead, Ruqayya. Like you drive into Palestine, there's gay people falling off the roofs. Like you gotta turn on your windshield wipers and because they're falling off the roofs, being killed left and right. It's such a ridiculous premise. Yeah. So the first, you always challenge the premise, especially when it's this ridiculous. Are gay people, homosexuals, people who support LGBT, whatever you want to label with them, people who are, gender fluid, are they being killed left and right in Muslim countries? Are they just like in hiding or else? Like this, that's the image that they're painting, right? They're saying, because a lot of the LGBT crowd support Palestinian rights. So they say, you're here, protesting for them. Go try to do that in Gaza. Like these are things that are going on in Palestine where people are saying like we don't want LGBT here. It's such a ridiculous premise to even accept, to begin arguing against. Well, that's not exactly what happens. It's not what happens at all. Those people are struggling to try to live freely, let alone worry about who's LGBT or not. Like that, those aren't things that are happening in the way that they portray them. With that being said, the Islamic narrative and what we believe the status of this in society is very different than others, and that's what we're doing here to describe it. But the idea that a gay person could be attacked in the streets or executed, or their livelihood or their lives can be violated with no Islamic repercussions, or that Islam promotes that, that's false. That's 100% false and couldn't be further from the truth. With maintaining the narrative that is not something that Islam allows, that we do believe that is not something that Allah is pleased with, it is a sin, and it is harmful for society, and it would not be something that Islam promotes or leaves open. There's no contradiction between these two statements. That the first one's absolutely false. That's not what Muslim countries look like, nor if Islam was perfectly implemented would that be their treatment. And with that being said, Islam is still against it, still preaches against it, and still teaches that this isn't the correct way of understanding the relationship between men, women, sexuality, and everything in between. That's like the brief answer. The longer one is what we're doing now. But do you think that suffices as an answer? You could say no, it's fine. I mean, so let's see if this gets us there, because each portion has its own purpose. The first portion is to establish that the Islamic ruling on homosexuality is we do not believe it's permissible. Why? Because Allah created us. He created all the faculties and amenities and luxuries and limbs that we use: food, drink, wealth, eyesight, sexuality, clothing. And He determines how all of them should be used and utilized in a way that's best for us. None of it, He doesn't gain anything out of it, right? This is all in our best interest on an individual level and on a societal level. That's the brief answer here of Islamic's viewpoint. And because of that, we believe on an individual level and a societal level, it is not something that is beneficial. It is harmful. And because of that, Allah has outlawed it. So that's the Islamic overview, the brief Islamic overview. Not just homosexuality, but any type of intimacy between any two people who are not currently husband and wife. So this is the Islamic point of view that puts me in a organized, structured response. So what is your take on whatever that answer is? This is a one-size-fits-all answer. What is your view on same-sex marriage? What is your view on masturbation? What is your view on all these other things that people do, and they're going to keep coming up with new things, past or present, that is a form of physical or any type of sexual intimacy? That will be my answer. That's an important place to start, which is the Islamic overview. The next part, which is, I think it's super important, it's part of the most crucial information timeline that you need, but it is not necessarily pertinent to all of us here, so I'll just do it very briefly. You can look at the next slide. It is the next slide, this is it. So where did this all come from? That's important for us to know. Most importantly for you, what you'll get out of it is it'll be a good defense and a good understanding of these emotional arguments of like, why don't you just let people live? Like, why are you not letting people just live their lives? Why do you care who I go to bed with at the end of the day? If it doesn't harm anybody, then what's the problem? These are sayings and quotes. You guys have heard them, right? I didn't make them up there. They're things that you'll see common. This is a great answer for it for yourself. That all of these are buzzwords, they're red herrings, they're distractions from the actual timeline of what's going on. From the first part, which I just discussed, which is my Islamic worldview, that this comes from a creator that knows best, that intends best. And then number two, that their point of view and their actions come from this convoluted, very strange and confused history of trying to figure out what to do. So very briefly, all throughout history, generally speaking, almost every single culture has a very strong taboo towards sexuality, nudity. These things are to be in private. They're not to be discussed openly. Very few societies didn't care at all and had these things out in public. So America is no different, right? Our society here, you'll still find certain laws that even though they're still codified in state constitutions, no one does them. Like a man has to respect a woman when she's getting out of a car, or other things of gender pleasantries that were made to preserve the chivalry of men and the femininity of women, you'll find some of them that still exist in some laws, but in some states, maybe some locales, but no one cares. So that was deteriorating in the early 1900s, leading up to the 1950s and 60s, where you have the sexual revolution. Long story short, the summary of the sexual revolution is none of this should be taboo. People should be open in who they want as their partner, and in what situation, and how and where. All those details is up to every individual. There's no reason to vilify it. That's all being backwards and prudish, and being somebody who's a square, who's very by the book, someone who's overly religious, someone who is a party pooper. All these understandings of anybody who's against these ideas, you're old-fashioned, right? And the sexual revolution, that was the summary, where all the religious norms, all the societal norms that were restricting sexual activity have to be ignored. Throw them all out. Instead of just looking at, is this old-fashioned? Just no, throw them all out and we'll figure it out. Sleep with whomever, whenever. There is no, red lines here. Just explore, man. Explore your sexuality. See how you feel. Whatever you enjoy, whatever brings you peace of mind, that is where you belong. So this is a summary. May not be the exact word for word, but is a summary of the sexual revolution that started in the late 50s and continued to the 80s. What did this lead to is a lot of decriminalization of things that used to be prohibited, like pornography is a good example. And again, how much were these things applied is a different story, but they were technically illegal. You have the introduction of the pill, the morning after pill, birth control. So it's much easier now to regulate the number one deterrent from this free sex movement. The number one deterrent wasn't people's religiosity, wasn't the financial burden of taking care of family. The number one deterrent was pregnancy. People did not want to get pregnant. People didn't want the stigma. People didn't want to take care of the kid. It's much easier to do it now because you could just press a button, more or less, and undo this main consequence that was driving most people back. All throughout history, by the way, right? This isn't something that's unique to America or any particular religion. All throughout history, this is the number one deterrent. What will people say? Right? This is what drives most people's existence. What will people say? What will Allah say? What is He currently stating? What are the angels currently saying? What is currently being recorded? All that takes the back seat. But what will people say? Right? This is something that drives most people's actions. So the pill gets rid of that. You have Roe versus Wade, which effectively says that anyone can have an abortion anywhere and no one can stop them. And homosexuality, transgenderism follows soon thereafter. So if you go back to the 60s, as late as like 1974, homosexuality is classified as a mental illness in the diagnostic manual for mental illnesses, right? The DSM-4, whatever number they're on, for psychiatrists or psychologists. So it's considered a mental illness, right? Same thing with gender dysphoria, or whatever you want to call the different gender diseases, that they're seen as a incorrect outlook, a pervasive way of thinking that is not normal, that needs to be treated. And then, of course, homosexuality was removed shortly thereafter, somewhere in the 70s. I don't know if the rest was removed also. So this just shows you where did it come from. In brief, you want to summarize all that you just heard. It's that they just took the markers off. They took off the guardrails and let the car go wild. If you take off the guardrails, there's nothing that will keep it straight. If it veers too far right, too far left, it hits into a cliff, it hits into a pool of water, none of that will prevent it because there are no guardrails, and that's essentially what they did since the 60s. Yes, okay? Shift away from what? Yeah. So I don't think that's like the major part of it. It definitely is affecting it, that how far people have drifted away from religious lifestyles and whatnot. I do not think it's the majority of it, because that's been ongoing for a while. The biggest change in recent history is the sexual revolution. Is Roe versus Wade. Is the pill. Those three things together, particularly in America, but even worldwide, have made the sexual lifestyle of the world, and the West in particular, very, it has invigorated it in a way that was not ever there. We've always had tons of brothels, tons of like peep shows or whatever you want to call them, tons of these, prostitution rings, and that has always existed. But with this last piece that I just described, and you want to add into that the internet, like what has happened in terms of sexuality, sexual deviance, what is accepted sexually and what is not, it's really has devolved, not evolved, has devolved in a very epic fashion, which has led to what we see today. None of this has existed before in this fashion. Even when in societies like we just heard with the people of Lut who had extreme sexual deviance, it's nowhere near what we're talking about here. So these are in my limited research, what are the greatest factors, which is based on the research of Mubin Vaid, Sheikh Mubin Vaid. He's the one who put this together in like a 5-hour presentation, and this is me dumbing it down for us. But yeah, so the religious influence diminishing is definitely a part of it. I don't think it's the majority of it. I think that the greatest part of it is what we're describing here. You go to the next slide. What does that lead to? The things that we're experiencing in our lifetime. These are just some trends. 48% of 13 to 20-year-olds identify as exclusively heterosexual, while 65% of millennials of age 21 to 34 said the same thing, that they're exclusively heterosexual. So you guys are getting gayer over time. That's what that means. Over a third of Gen Z strongly agreed that gender did not define a person as much as it used to. Right, 28% versus 20% of millennials, and you can look at these stats on your own. The conclusion is it is getting weirder, right? Things are getting stranger. Look at the next slide. So this is also just summarizing over these last 50, 60 years what has happened. So sex now becomes about pleasure and the individual. That was not the case. Before, sex was about creating more human beings. It was about spending the whole life, your whole life with a life partner, right? These were the central concepts or themes in the idea of sexual intimacy. Now, in the last 60 years, it becomes purely on pleasure and the individual, and it's become integral to your identity. What you decide here and how you hold yourself and portray yourself here is super important to you as a person. That was never there before either. Sex with whoever, whenever, however, is viewed as liberation, progress, and good. Marriage is now redefined as a lifestyle choice or a personal pleasure to seek. Why? Because the family is not as important. Things like gender roles are not important. Things like the purpose of life is not important. So marriage is now just like another activity that we do on the weekend, as opposed to some kind of purposeful life decision. And skyrocketing divorce, children out of wedlock, zina, all that ensues right afterwards. So the whole point of this is it's a very easy linear progression to see that when these things took hold, people got weirder. What was socially acceptable or sexually acceptable, the bar for that has gotten lower. People are more acceptable to say anything. Now they are targeting and they're seriously viewing incest, right? Sex with relatives. They're looking at bestiality, sex with animals, right? Inanimate objects. These things are not jokes or just being weird. These are things that are seriously being pursued with organizations and movements and people saying we have rights too, and this is a legitimate sexual preference that you have to respect. So that's where we're at today. Next slide. Are they born like that or do they become like that? What do you guys think? So, Dunya, you said they become like that. How so? So because they can't procreate, they cannot produce children, then it's not natural? I'm asking your opinion, but I'm going to pick it apart. So if you feel like this is your opinion, please do share it. If you can't stand when I pick at it, it's just an indication to you that maybe it's not a very strong opinion for yourself, or that you need to better look up how to define it. But I will do that. So please don't feel intimidated. And don't say I don't want to share because I don't want it to be picked apart. Let's explore it together. Yeah, Rami. Are you done, Dunya? So you said that it's if it was natural, then they should be able to procreate. The fact that they cannot produce children, that's enough proof that it's not natural. Everybody agree? Why not? What's wrong, both of you? What's wrong with that particular statement? Is there something wrong with that? If it was natural, they would have been able to procreate. So you're okay with it? Still thinking about it. It's fine. Rami? There's no such thing as love. It's just something Hallmark made up to sell cards. I'm following. It's just not very scientific. But the question was, go ahead, Amir.
In regards to the procreation argument,
Yeah.
devil's advocate here, they'll say that today with modern medical advances, it doesn't matter because you can find a surrogate egg and raise a kid using that method.
Yeah. So thank you for getting us back on track. So the argument was a decent one, but like it doesn't necessarily answer the question of nature versus nurture. You're saying it doesn't make any sense. That's not particularly an answer, right? To you, it doesn't make sense. Would be the conclusion. But just very quickly with that, someone could argue if it was natural, they'd be able to have children. Someone can then come with the other argument, which is if it was natural, for them to, um, that the idea of having children is not such a vital component of marriage in the first place. Not anymore. Why? Because we can adopt. We don't need children. It's not vital. The human race isn't gonna die because me and you chose not to have children, or me and you in this community. Why does that objectively prove that it's not right or wrong? Why does it objectively prove that something is natural or not? That's my argument right now. My argument is homosexuality or homosexual tendencies, or however you want to label these emotions. Are they natural? Do they happen inside of a person on their own? Or is it because of the nurture, their environment around them, what they watch, and who the influences are?
So, I really wish I had this on hand because it's something I came across like maybe 2 months ago. It was a study that was done by the press. I think it was like back in the 90s, where basically he was kind of still on like he was kind of going off the base of what was like shown in the 70s, like, oh, this is considered a mental disease. But he wanted to really get to like the bottom of it. Again, fortunately, I don't have his name on hand, but he conducted a study where he actually like interviewed a lot of people who identified as homosexual, and he was find out that like over 70% of the people that he interviewed had a history of sexual child abuse, which he was like, okay, this is very interesting. This is a common denominator that like the vast majority, like over 2/3, are have the common issue of, oh, they were abused by uncle or something as a child. And what's even more interesting is the fact that like 10 years later, like once the 2000s rolled in, he actually, because he like published it in like Forbes or like Times Magazine, he actually had to then retract his statements because then it became like, oh, this is now something acceptable. It's not a it's not a construct or a disease as well. But it also like raises the question as well, like if it was truly natural, we would see a lot more of it just by its own pop up. Like if it's so natural, why is it that half of people aren't, or even the vast majority of people, why is it like some even split, like heterosexual versus homosexual? So it kind of goes back to him, like he's finding the common denominator that most people who are homosexual actually have a history of sexual abuse as children, which is also not natural.
So why isn't there more of them? That's something that the research will actually say the number is increasing as more people are comfortable coming out with it. They're not afraid So it's still not anywhere near what a natural number would represent, but they'll say it can easily represent that, which is 20 to 30%. But I get what you're saying. Let's do one more with Abu Amira before we move on.
Go back to ayah, Nuh alayhi salam reprimands these people, those who engage in this halaqa activities, that you doing something which nobody before you did, so it means now what wasn't natural.
Okay, so some of them have argued that, which is he tells them, you come with this fahisha that no one before you has ever done before. So this is a proof that's not natural, right? These are the first people to do it ever. It does kind of support that conclusion, but not fully, because at the end of the day, they're the first people to have done it. It doesn't mean it means the first people to have acted upon it, but where did the act itself come from is where the discussion is. The Islamic answer is actually very simple. It doesn't matter. Islam doesn't provide an actual answer. Is it natural or is it from your environment? The question is, because it seems like some people didn't exactly pick up what I was saying, someone who has homosexual tendencies, they have same gender attraction. Is that something they were born with, part of their physical, chemical, spiritual makeup? Or was it taught to them because of the movies and the shows and the music or some sexual abuse or whatever it is? Which one is it? This is such a big deal to people because they'll argue what? If it was natural, then no one can be blamed for it. And it wouldn't be fair that Allah naturally created these people as such and then holds them accountable for it. You're not allowed to feel like this, even though I made you feel like this. That's the argument they're saying, that Allah is exhibiting. So as almost always with all these questions, it's a loaded question. And the premise that is being posed in the very beginning is the one that has to be resisted to begin with. Go ahead, a couple of slides. We'll come back to these later. Again. Okay, stop here. So the first thing is whether it's nature or nurture. These people naturally feel like this. They just woke up one day and found the same gender attraction, or if it was something that was taught to them by movies, TV shows, sexual abuse, whatever it is. It was introduced from the outside. The real answer is it does not matter Islamically speaking. Either one is a possibility. Allah could make someone naturally inclined to a sin. There's no unwritten rule or written rule that says Allah doesn't do this. Makes you inclined for something that's wrong. You'll have an inclination to it. And also, that's not the default, but then what you do in your environment could make that the default. That you're inclined more towards haram, and it's really difficult for you to give up. And the halal option is less interesting because of the environment that you or others put yourselves in. So here in modern Western culture, they separate these three things. Sexual activity, reproduction, producing children, and then marriage. These are three separate things. Meaning not everybody you engage in sexual activity with, you're married to, or that your goal is children. These are three separate things that have no connection to each other in Western culture or modern Western culture. They also said that biological sex, gender, identity and expression, and then sexual orientation are three separate things. So they separated these three things. And then saying that desires, who someone sexually desires, the actions that they perform, and then who they are as a person are three things that are connected. So they disconnect the first three and the second three, and then they connect the last three. This is why they're so confused. Because what does this mean? What this means is, anybody get it? Want to try to explain it? See if it works at face value before. What this means, Islamically speaking, is that who you're supposed to have sex with is the same person you're supposed to marry, is the same person you're supposed to have children with. This is how Islam teaches that these things are connected, and this is the correct way of all three of them happening in the system of marriage. While somebody could have a relationship, a haram relationship, with the same gender or different gender, and that has no effect on who they are as a person. Islamically speaking, we don't put them into a category now called homosexual. What category did they just transfer into? Huh? Haram. There you go. Thank you. It's not a small idea. It's not like them telling you, hey, you're an idiot, and they backbit you or something. It's a bigger sin than that. But the category that they just transferred over from is from an innocent person into a sinner. Categorically speaking, no different than if they stole or murdered or beat somebody up or did something else that was haram. As a haram action, of course, it's worse than a lot of these things. It's one of the worst sins. But categorically speaking, this is something that they can't grasp. Somebody who performs this action or has these desires, they must be such a person, a homosexual, a gay, a transgender, a whatever letter of the alphabet. You're a separate person now. And there's a problem with who you are. And that's not compatible with who your family is. And that's not compatible with your religion. And now all of a sudden you have to go to war with all of existence. And it's either or. There's no middle ground. And what's the end result? That these people have the worst lives. They have the most psychological, emotional turmoil. Because of what the system has done to them more than anything. So we'll get back inshallah and we'll wrap it up immediately after Maghrib. But this is, we're a little bit more than 50% of the way there. We're going to speak about briefly how does Islam now speak to people who are struggling, specifically when it comes to sexual desire, but it really applies to anything but 3 specific instances, or 4 of them, that have to do with sexual desire, with how the Prophet ﷺ addressed it, and then how to address Muslims who struggle through these things, and then common questions like, can I befriend them? Do I still have to wear hijab in front of a homosexual man? Do I have to use their pronouns? Can I join forces with them when it comes to protesting? We're going to address, inshallah, all those. Please, I'm really banking on you guys having some meaningful questions or some meaningful ways of shaping and directing this discussion as we wrap it up, inshallah. Yeah, keep the stream going, yeah. There's no reason to stop it, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu salam ala rasulullah. I don't want to drag on too long because I know there's going to be a lot of points and questions that we can easily tangent into from this topic. But to keep it brief and beneficial, so where we left off is that in Islam, it's a completely different perspective. It's a completely different worldview and approach. So just as a heads up, for anybody who here is under 16, this is technically for 16 plus. So usually it's 21 plus, but today we made it 16 plus in anticipation of this topic. And I notice there's a lot of people who are under 16. So if you're fine with them hearing it, it's up to you. But we're not going to filter what we're discussing. So we're talking about Islamic take on sexuality and LGBT. So just as a heads up. So Islam doesn't separate between our worldview and our perspective when it comes to sexual activity, reproduction, and marriage. All 3 of these things are closely related, and they occupy the same category, the same headspace, the same address altogether. All 3 of them: marriage, reproduction, and sexual activity. And then for in today's world, they separated between these things, as well as separated between their desires, their actions, their identity. Each of these has a different designation in your life. What does that mean? What does that translate into for us to make it practical? That means a Muslim could have a same-sex attraction, could be attracted to someone of the same gender, and we see no need, no pressure to designate them as gay. In Islam, we don't need to do that. This is what creates a lot of their tension and their dichotomy and their dilemmas and like, well, what are we supposed to do with this? Well, that's your problem, right? That's a you problem. In Islam, this person, this individual, can have same-sex attraction, still be a good Muslim, and still get married and still have all the other struggles that they would have had otherwise. We don't hit that brick wall that they do, which is, what do I do now? Right? Somebody who has been married for X amount of years and then has this same gender attraction to somebody. It throws their life out of whack, right? It's seen as this identity issue. It's seen as, I don't know who I am. My whole life is a lie. That's how it's seen because they don't separate between these things, and they've made their desires a central tenet to why they exist and what they're doing here. It's about being pleased. It's about being satisfied. It's about physical pleasure. So for that reason, when any of that changes, my whole life changes. When the Muslim, that is not the case. Whether they have same-sex attraction or not. They can have opposite sex attraction, have this problem. Right or wrong. Where they're too attracted to the opposite gender now, and they're unable to control themselves, holding back from haram relationships, haram actions. What's the difference now? There is a difference, right? Where with the same gender, it's seen as specifically repulsive because of its reversal of nature, and it has a heightened status of negativity, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, like we were saying earlier, categorically it's the same thing. You left the permissible boundaries of expressing yourself in this category. That's where we started from, right? Allah determines how I as a Muslim express myself and how I eat, how I dress, how I engage with sexuality, with everything. And I've left the permissible scope of that to do something impermissible. And at the end of the day, that's all it'll ever be. Not to belittle the sin, but to show that we don't have these identity dilemmas. These complete, like, oh, upheaval of what do we do now? In Islam, that doesn't happen. It doesn't struggle to integrate this issue into an Islamic society. Not at all. It never has. It never has all throughout history. In fact, the way that it viewed it and incorporated it is very liberal compared to a lot of our examples today. Very tolerant, even. Because at the end of the day, the action is what's forbidden and will be actively denounced and discouraged. But in terms of how people act and hold themselves, how does Islam police that? How does Islam police that? So, how does it police the stuff that should stay behind closed doors and shouldn't be? So, it's going to police the sexual act itself, right? Zina or any other type of sexual act. That if it's caught publicly, it could be punished, and that's how that's discouraged. How does it change the perspective and the identity that we're talking about now? What does Islam do about that? Do we have a thought police that if you express certain ideas, they'll come speak to you? So how does Islam do that? Yeah. How does Islam stop people from accepting these ideas or adopting unwanted sexual behaviors, for example? Do we beat people up? No? Do we have a... Okay, I'm glad you said no. Do we have a gaydar at the door, and if it beeps, you... So, okay, Islam's okay with it? Is that what you're saying? Tread carefully, brother. You can say whatever, man. I'm just putting random pressure on you for no reason. I don't feel that way. I'm asking you.
If someone feels that way, I can't really think of a way for them to stop thinking that.
Okay? So Islam doesn't have any say here. That's what you're taking. I'm asking, man. It's okay.
Definitely not, oh no, we're going to beat them up or stone them or something.
Okay, so I'm glad it's not that one. Rami? Okay. Go ahead, brother. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the end of the day. Then you're going to say something? It aims to produce a society of men and women who collectively, through the way that they think and their goals, these things would diminish and they would be seen as unnatural and not enjoy. They would be repulsive. Right? At the end of the day, there's certain actions that are policed, like stealing, like zina. But in the way that they're policed, even Islamically speaking, it's not what anybody thinks. A lot of people think like in Islamic society, there's limbs flying off and heads rolling down the street, and 2 weeks of that, and everybody's is okay after that. They don't play games after that, because all it takes is a week or two of bloodbath. I've heard religious speakers say this, right? Some sheikh somewhere, I don't know why, he's on a mic and he's saying, you guys are really worried about this whole Sharia stuff. It's just 2 weeks of heads and hands flying around, and everyone will be straight after that. We don't have to worry. I was like, okay, someone has to take away his microphone and his sheikh license if there is one. But it's definitely not the way I would do da'wah or recommend it, because that's not what the Sharia does. That's not how it works. That through these punishments, people just see them and say, never mind. When the society is established properly, then they do that. But before, it doesn't get to punishments anywhere near. But that's a separate tangent. But the point is, these kind of attitudes, Islam would police them the way that it does through what we're doing here, which is da'wah. Do we all want to worship Allah correctly? That's our purpose in life? Yeah, we all do. We all collectively agree. Do we all find things that He made haram repulsive and abhorrent to us? No, we don't. How can we work on that so that our desires are more revealed and what he made right and wrong. And then we kind of keep doing that. We hope our generation, the next generation, comes out even purer, and you make that change, right? So it doesn't aim to police it any more than that. Pushing forward the certain gender roles that make the most sense, right? Highlighting them with a few underlines. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Now, is it a failure in a part of a dawah, like we're in the workplace, and a homosexual colleague approaches us and actually people who perform dawah, right? And they continue. Is it a shortcoming in our fault that we just didn't do enough?
So look at it the way that you look at any other da'wah project. He's asking if I have a homosexual coworker, and I do a little bit of this to them. I preach a little bit to them, and they doesn't work. At what point am I resolved of my responsibility? I'm absolved. Yes. Yeah.
I'll be honest, if it was a homosexual coworker, I would keep my distance away from I wouldn't even okay, if they're not a Muslim, they're gonna I feel like they would take a bunch of a lot of offense if I try to try to enlighten them or something. I'm trying to keep my distance away.
Now you're homophobic. You just can't win. So, just like any other sin, first to answer your question, if you had a Muslim, forget non-Muslim, Muslim who is drinking, and you're telling him, hey man, this is no good, you should stop, and he doesn't listen immediately, does that mean you failed? Not necessarily. So it's about doing what you can, giving the da'wah that you know how to give and you're confident. And then number two is also, even if you've done what you can, you're not really responsible beyond that. So it's a very low level of obligation of what would be haram for you not to do. What's the level that you must speak up before you're sinful? It's not a lot. Then after that, you choose to stay quiet, it's up to you. But then there's some kind of moral, social responsibility that this person had access to me and I didn't do da'wah to them. So see how you could do it over time. You know, how you could bring it up. The fact that that's particular to homosexuality doesn't change too much. So you're saying that you'd stay away from them. Well, it's not necessarily that much different than kufr, which is worse, right? Kufr is worse than homosexuality. It's not worse than the rest of than a lot of the other lifestyle packages that they're coming with, which is all antithetical to Islam and needs to be changed. So it's just da'wah at the end of the day. How can you be a positive influence? Yeah, brother.
Now we get in the workplace. Persistent dawah, particularly with this topic, could be seen as like intolerant and like flagged.
Yeah.
Someone from HR, right?
So I'm going to get to that. Let me just wrap this up quickly because I don't want to drag for too long. Go back. Can you go back a couple of slides? So any questions about anything specific to what we said? One more. All right, forward one. Any questions? Like all those other scenarios we'll get to in a minute. So Islam doesn't do this, right? It doesn't label people as gay or even as someone who drinks or commits zina. It might legally label them. They might legally need to be labeled, right? Because there's going to be legal repercussions. But you as a person, you as an individual, Islam doesn't give you these titles. Doesn't force you into this description that categorizes who you are. So particularly something like gay or homosexual, why would somebody insist on these titles? What do they do for you? Yeah. So I think there's a sinister intent behind that label for sure, to push you into a certain lifestyle, a certain description that makes you easier to control or benefit from. Now there's a whole gay lifestyle, there's whole gay clothing, there's gay products, there's certain products that are associated with certain movements and others within the movement, so there's money to be made off of you. There is, just this idea of hedonism. Do whatever feels good, whatever tastes good. There's pushing that at every single turn is what the Western society does so that you're constantly consuming and purchasing and lost. Also, it forces you into this characteristic or this identity that you now have to actively get out of. As opposed to saying, no, I may have this issue, but that's not who I am. Right? It's very debilitating to take that away from people, and that's what they want. Yes, Dunya. So a lot of that changed like in the last two generations where you kind of see it happen in front of you where it did seem like it was overnight, but it was actually being pushed in the laws a little slowly but surely. So when I was growing up, for example, it would come into the news every once in a while, but it wasn't as frequent as it is now. But it was always the same issues like marriage, gay marriage, schools, and their protection in schools. So at one point, it became this movement, which of course I didn't spend time on it just to keep it brief, but there's agendas there as well. And the main one is the breakup of the family. The main goal of this is to break up the family because as an individual, you're much easier to control. You're much easier to slap onto a device. There's a lot less resistance to all of what they want in terms of struggles with, agendas with your sexuality, agendas with your wealth, agendas with your religion, agendas with you as an American. All of that is easier when you're an individual, when you're focused primarily on what feels good and what tastes good and everything else doesn't matter. That's a lot harder to do when you're a family man or a family woman who's religious, who cares about society. So this is part of what I think is the main agenda of it getting pushed so much recently, but it wasn't exactly as quick as it felt. It was definitely something that was in the works. I want to cover these hadiths just quickly, just to show our Islamic approach towards sins and people who struggle with sins specifically, because this is that category here. So we have here the hadith of An-Nu'ayman ibn Amr radiallahu anhu. He says that a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he was nicknamed Himar. His nickname is Donkey. Anybody could relate? I'm sure your parents can would have something to say here. So they called him Donkey for whatever reason. And he was known to be humorous. Right? He was known for his humor, his funny disposition. And one time, he was caught drinking, publicly drinking. So he was taken and he was flogged. So he used to flog people for drinking. I don't know why I put that picture there, just because it came to mind when you say flogging. That's not what Islamic flogging looks like at all. Yeah. Definitely, not to make flogging like a light issue, but just in line with what we were saying, like, how people misunderstand certain things. So in Islamic, especially in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was reported that they'd either use their hands or the tip of their clothes. So tip of your clothes is like this. So that's what was used to flog people for drinking. How much damage can I do with my hand, right? Or the tip of my clothes? Because the point is not torture. It's not physical torment. It's more shame, spiritual and emotional, right? This person was brought for zina, God forbid, or drinking in front of all these people and had to go through this. So it was developed up to lashes in the time of Umar, and then it went up from 40 for drinking. It went up from 40 to 80 or 100. But anyway, the point is, it never looked like this. Even when it became lashes, they didn't use anything like this whatsoever. But that's not the point. It was a good graphic and it showed up, so I put it here. So this man was brought, he was lashed for drinking, 40 lashes. What happens the next day or a few days later? He's brought again for drinking again. So they lash him again. And then a third time. And then after 3 times, a man stands up and he says, "Oh Allah, curse him. May Allah curse him. May have la'na upon him." La'na is to be expelled from the mercy of Allah. It's a very serious thing. مَا أَكْثَرَ مَا يُؤْتَى بِهِ. How often is he going to be brought here? He's saying, why may Allah curse this man? How often are you going to be brought here? You have no shame. Like, how many times we're going to bring you for the same exact sin? Everyone knows that you drink. The Prophet ﷺ stands up and he says, "La tal'anuh, don't curse him. فَوَاللَّهِ مَا عَلِمْتُ إِلَّا أَنَّهُ يُحِبُّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. I swear I do not know anything about him except that he loves Allah and His Messenger." So there's this, the whole point of this is what? There's this separation. It's not like, hey man, get your act together. They're kind of right. You need to stop doing this. Or not even like nicely saying like, hey man, you don't want to keep being brought here. It's not nice. Let me come talk to you. It's stop attacking him. He loves Allah and His Messenger. I will testify to sincerity of faith in this man that's being currently punished for drinking alcohol for the 3rd or 4th time in front of all of us. It's a very distinct separation of identity and mistakes that you do. May God curse you. You're drunk. You have no shame. Don't say that about him. I know that all I know about him, actually, he says, "Ma alimtu." I don't know anything about him. I swear by Allah, I don't know anything about him except he loves Allah and His Messenger. Next slide. So here we have the hadith of Ma'iz and the Ghamidi woman. So Ma'iz, they're both people who committed zina after marriage. So as we know, the punishment here is stoning. And I think this was supposed to be, yeah, it's supposed to be cropped out. Okay, I was wondering why there's a Buddha statue in my picture. It's supposed to be cropped out, but it's not even fully cropped out here. But it was supposed to be cropped out where it looks just like prayer beards. So Ma'iz comes to the Prophet ﷺ. He says, I've committed zina. And the Prophet ﷺ ignores him 3 times. And in fact, he turns away from him completely. And each time that he turns away, Ma'iz comes back to face him. And after the 3rd time, he tells the people around him, ﷺ, is this man crazy? Like, can anyone just attest to say, yeah, Ma'iz loses his mind sometime and we'll let him go? Can anyone attest to maybe he drank? He's drunk right now? They said, no, he's as healthy as can be. He's fine. So when none of that worked, 3 times trying to dismiss him and then trying to verify some other incapacity to testify against himself, when none of that works, the Prophet ﷺ now exacts the punishment and he is executed. And when they see him at the funeral and he's tiptoeing, he says, I'm tiptoeing from the amount of angels that are crowding this janazah. The Ghamidi woman is the same story. After 3 times, she tells him, don't try to turn me away the way that you did to who? To Ma'iz. I was there. And I know what happened and I won't be refused. And then she's pregnant, so she gives birth. The child is weaned for 2 years, gets the ability to eat solid food, and then is handed off to a relative, and then she's executed. And he says, when someone expresses displeasure or disgust at her as well, he says, if her repentance was divided among 70 households of Medina, it'd be enough to forgive all of them. Meaning 70 families can go to Jannah with this one tawbah that she just did. The last hadith, you go next. It is the hadith of the man that we all know, that he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, "I'dhan li bizina, permit me, grant me permission, green light to commit zina. Make it okay just for me." Hey guys, the Prophet ﷺ announced it. For this man, it's okay. No one reprimand him. No one punish him. He has a green light in the sight of Allah. You can do that, right? You're the messenger of Allah. Ask Allah to give me that green light. So the people begin to freak out. The Prophet ﷺ, the hadith says that they began to rebuke him. What's wrong with you? What kind of question is that? Back off, right? This is the kind of reaction that he receives. The Prophet ﷺ tells them to calm down, to relax, and he tells him to come close. When he comes close, he asks him, "Atuhibbuhu li ummik?" Would you be satisfied with this being for your mother? Like if I give you the permission, it's going to be with someone's mother. Would you be satisfied if it happened to be yours? He says no. What about your sister, your aunt, your daughter, your cousin? Each one he says no. And he says, likewise, no one would be satisfied that this is allowed for their mother, their sister, their daughter, their aunt, or their cousin. The same way you went through name by name and it ignited a reaction in you, that's how people would react to their relatives, so it wouldn't be fair otherwise. So then he put his blessed hand on his chest, ﷺ, and he said, "Oh Allah, Allahumma ghfir dhanbah, forgive his sins, wa tahhir qalbah, purify his heart, wa hassin farjah, and guard his chastity." And he was not seen turning left or right after that. He didn't stare at people. He didn't have a staring problem. The Prophet ﷺ's dua came true. What's the point of all 3 of these? There's a separation between the sin, this person's identity, their relationship with Allah and His Messenger, and then how others are supposed to treat them. Islam didn't allow us to mix between these things. That just because someone committed a sin means they're called that, and they're treated as such. Islam doesn't do that unequivocally across the board. Of course, certain sins and certain interactions will mandate certain consequences. But intrinsically speaking, that's not something that Islam has a problem with. In this context, Islam doesn't have a problem with people who have same-sex attraction. It doesn't have a problem with you can't be a Muslim. Doesn't. This is something that people have created. You can't be gay and Muslim. That's not true. We disagree with the whole idea of gay as an identity and taking it on and agreeing with what it comes with. That's why hopefully we just did now and hopefully some of it stuck. But the bottom line is no, Islam, we don't have a problem with that. You're just like any other sinner. You repent. You struggle against it. Even if you don't repent and don't struggle against it, you're still a Muslim. You're just not in a very good position. Right? Anyone who acknowledges that something is haram and doesn't struggle against it, whatever that sin is, it could be, calling people names. It could be eating non-dhabiha meat, whatever. It's not a good place to be in. But it's not a impossible place to be in. Yeah, brother. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm getting to that to the end. Like, how do we deal with Muslims in this situation? But his question was some actions they will determine your identity. No, the action has consequences. What I mean that doesn't determine your identity, meaning Islamically speaking, in the Islamic uh, eye, the Islamic judgment of things, you're not a zani or a drinker, right? This Islam doesn't label you as such. You're a Muslim who committed this sin. That sin may have consequences associated with it, so there may be a punishment associated with it, but that's not who you are. You're not boiled down to just this sin, even if it has capital punishment involved in it. Your identity is not this sinner. You're still an individual who may have committed this sin, who may have got caught doing it, who may have received the punishment, but the rest of your life and in the standing with Allah, most importantly, you're not just this sin. So, first of all, not all the sins you get capital punishment for. But even then, that doesn't mean like you're so-and-so, the zani who got executed. Ma'iz and the Ghamidi woman here are not known because of their zina. They're known because of their repentance. That is what Allah chose for them to be highlighted by their tawbah. Even though they died after committing zina and for that sin. But their identity with us is that they're known for their tawbah. And the bottom line is, if we could switch places with them, how would you feel if I could offer you to switch places with Ma'iz or the Ghamidi woman? Would you take it? Who would take it? Who would switch places with Ma'iz or the Ghamidi woman? Who wouldn't? Who says no? Who's not sure? What's hard about that decision? It's not what I expected. There's no other logical answer except to wish you were them. They were forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. Their life, they succeeded. They're going to Jannah. They were forgiven. It's a promise that none of us have. It's a guarantee that none of us can claim, that we've been forgiven for anything, let alone life in its entirety. I don't know that I've been forgiven for any single sentence that was haram. So the idea that the possibility of being given that guarantee, let alone from the Prophet ﷺ, is a no-brainer for all of us. That you would wish to receive such kind of conviction in your lifetime. So what were we talking about? Identity, right? So Islam doesn't mandate an identity according to a sin or a lifestyle. All these are tricks of the shaitan to force people into, now you must do this. Now you have no decision, no choice, foot on the gas pedal. There's no other option. When Islam, that's not the case. Someone could commit a sin, the worst of sins, could be a regular performer of that sin and a propagator and a promoter, and then overnight they change, done, right? They can completely abandon that title or that lifestyle in an instance. So that's kind of the main point here. Why are we going through all of this, guys? Because this is directly juxtaposed with the LGBTQ narrative. Everything that we've said so far clashes with the narrative directly, and it shows you that it has no standing. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's nothing to wonder, how do I explain this? Why do I stand against it as a Muslim? Because like everything that I do, its purpose to succeed in it, from the very air I breathe and the food and drink that I ingest to the clothing that I wear and the rituals that I do, all that is in a way that must be pleasing to my Creator. And He only mandates it in a fashion that is procuring benefit for me or preventing harm for me. Step number one. Step number two is that when it comes to the Islamic outlook, it's haram. It limited proper sexual interaction between man and woman when they're married. Point number three is, if I follow the train wreck of where this stuff comes from, I can follow it in a very clear line in the last 60, 70 years from the sexual revolution, and what the agenda of these things are. I didn't do that in detail here, but that's clearly traceable and easy to follow. Number 4, or point number 4 or 5, is that Islam doesn't put me into this contradiction, doesn't put me in this dilemma where I don't know how to deal with sins or attitudes, even when they've become things that have encompassed my life, have become an addiction, have become something that is closely entwined with who I am. Like the man who said, give me permission to commit zina. Like Ma'iz and the Ghamidi woman who at first glance seemed like they ruined their life. Like the man who was addicted to drinking. All those show me that no, I can have these problems and Islam is still there for me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still my destination. Tawbah is still a possibility. Even as I struggle with these sins live and I still didn't get rid of them, I'm still in the cleaning process. And that leads me to the last part now. Any questions about any of that? That's what we've been doing so far with this structure. Last part, very quickly. It's kind of repetitive. You can go to the next slide. Stuff that we already mentioned again here. So here we've kind of mentioned this already. But when it comes to Muslims, that you rarely see and you're rarely hear because they won't share this with you. That's number 1. Number 2 is, well, that's pretty much the main point. They won't share this with you, so it'll remain hidden. And the ones that need it the most will be those that seek it the least. So you got to go out of your way to understand these points that we just shared and transfer them to others. So one thing that I would mention is that it's super crucial to that first part, which is the separation. This is not who you are. It's a struggle that you have. Guess what? We all have struggles. There's no reason to mandate the acceptance of that identity. I identify as such. I'm a gay, lesbian, Muslim. Why does that sentence need to be said? I'm a Muslim who struggles with, and that long list that we all have. Then you're just one of us. You're another person, right? That's a lot more comfortable for people. That's a lot more indicative of a way back, of a struggle you could work on, than, oh, whoops, you're gay and you're Muslim. We don't know what to do you now. We don't know where to place you. Allah doesn't know where to place you. You're an unknown category. It's not the case at all. So that has to be adequately relayed to those people. There's a lot of things that you can reach out. Straight Struggle is one of them. Beyond the Rainbow. These are 2 services. I don't know if one of them is a podcast, but you'll find them online. Straight Struggle and Beyond the Rainbow. Exploring these ideas and how Muslims specifically can struggle through this. There is platonic relationships. I've heard of people doing that. Not Muslims particularly, but people who have homosexual tendencies. They get into a platonic relationship, meaning this person marries this person. And it's platonic. Not maybe, there is no physical sexual attraction between them. But they're just going to be best friends, I guess, till death does them part. And you'll be surprised. Maybe over time, like you were saying earlier, Rami, that love is something that could blossom here. Or maybe they will fall in love. Even if it's not directly, physically, sexually related, it might be that this is their life partner and they do live happily ever after. Same-sex attraction. Sometimes it's written as SGA, same gender. And then when it comes to people who are not directly struggling with these emotions, I'll say what Muhammad you were saying earlier, right? Muhammad, you were saying earlier, which is don't bully people. So growing up, that was the butt of a lot of jokes, where somebody you could make fun of them, say they're gay and whatnot. And then now it's not socially acceptable. But besides it being socially acceptable or not, you don't know what someone's going through. You don't know if it's a struggle that they actually have. So are you helping that struggle or are you making it worse? There's a lot of people who, even if they don't have same gender attraction, they're not as feminine as everybody else. They're not as masculine as everyone else. So when people are jumping into a pool or something and everyone's like, look how scrawny he is and he doesn't look like a man, and you might, even outside of all this, you might be ruining their day. You might be ruining their life. This could be something they heard about for the last 20 years. I used to know people from our community, like growing up, whenever we'd go to eat, they would order 2 or 3 meals extra because they were sick of this problem. They'd literally order an extra meal and they're no hungry, just like, I'm trying to throw on some weight. All of us are like, we have the opposite problem. We're like, hey man, why don't you take some of my fat and like I'll transfer it over to you. They didn't invent that yet. But like, it's something that my point is they struggle with day in and day out. It's causing them tons of turmoil because they're referred to as the skinny one, the fat one, the ugly one, the non-manly, the the non-feminine person. So don't be shaitan's aid against your brother. This is something that Umar ibn Khattab said as somebody was being punished for drinking. Again, they said, like, what a horrible person. Like, you have no shame getting caught and now you're getting punished. He said, don't be shaitan's assistance against your brother. If you're going to help him, if you're going to stick out a hand, it's to help pick him up. It is not to push him down. So be very wary of the bullying, of the joking. If you're not sure that if you're helping or not, then just be quiet. Right? That's something that is very easy to navigate, which is this possibly hurting somebody? Is it putting them down? Will it make their life already harder in this extremely difficult to negative circumstance? Difficult to navigate circumstance? If the answer is yes, don't say that thing. Don't make that joke. Don't make their life harder. Very quickly, just to wrap it up now, and then I'll see your questions. These might be some of your own questions. If you go to the next slide, please. So there's two documents I'd recommend you check out: Navigating Differences and Navigating LGBTQ+. So I don't think there's, I think if you just search that, it'll come up. You don't need to add anything else. Navigating Differences, Navigating LGBTQ+. These are both documents. One of them is written by Yaqeen. The second one, I forgot who wrote it, but it's about navigating this issue. The discussion we just had, plus some. Now, questions for you. Can I befriend them? Can I have a gay friend or a lesbian friend? Who says, let's do democracy since everyone looks at me like I'm an alien when I ask a question. Who says yes? Who says no? Social pressure is on. I've seen some people do this and change their mind. Have some spine. Like, just make your own decisions. Yeah. Sure, you can ask a follow-up question. I didn't say if they're Muslim or not. They're just...
Let's just say someone who's drinking, like college to drink, smoke, whatever you want to say, right? If you have the capacity to be friends with them, why not? Is my question.
So your question is, if you can have friends who smoke and drink and are non-Muslim, then why not? Well, what's this? What makes this any different? Yeah.
Like, you're not
No, I hear you.
your identity to who they are. They're a sin to who.
So I'd love to ask that to the people who said who said no. You wouldn't be friends with them either, so no friends. It's done wonders for me. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
So I would say, like, you should befriend those who are benefit from your religion, not those who come with invasion. But maybe those people will, like, bring your faith stuff, make you stronger.
So-
I think you should avoid it.
So your answer was it should be faith-based. Are you positively or negatively impacting my faith? That's what will determine if I'm friends with you. For that, I'll raise the question. Remind me your name, brother? Anis. The same question Anis raised, which was, are they any more particularly harmful to your faith than a friend who drinks, smokes, or is a kafir? Or is a Muslim that does these things anyway? We'll go back to it. Go ahead, Rami.
I just want to say, I want to clarify, we're kind of arguing whether or not it's permissible to have friends that are, well, one, also in the LGBTQ, but also it's brought up that are alcoholics, that do all this other stuff, that are weak or simple. I think, I mean, I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but
That's my job.
to what I understand, it is permissible to have friends that do these things. It's just not recommended. You know, like was mentioned earlier. But it's best to have friends who increase you in faith or that you can learn from, rather than have friends that will influence you towards the wrong direction. But technically, I wouldn't, at least to my knowledge, it's something that says that you aren't, like you're shunned, like you're forbidden to
Okay.
have these friends.
Go ahead, Muhsin, then I'll chime in because I got a bunch of questions for you guys.
I'm going to pose a rather, it's not getting off topic, but I'm going to pose a rather controversial counter question. And that's pretty much for everyone, and this applies to just in general. What defines a person as a friend? Because honestly,
Define believe, right?
yes, because like honestly, just like how we have this whole
I don't want to be your friend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, what friend, back in the day would mean someone who's like practically a family member, but you've known them for as long as your family
I
member.
don't want that either.
But it's like at the end of the day, still, it's like there's a deeper relationship. Like there's, I believe, a strong difference between friends versus friendly acquaintance. Where a
So,
lot of people, you can have friendly acquaintanceships where we're acquainted, we know each other, we're not on hostile terms, we're even on friendly terms.
yeah.
Are they really friends?
So, just because that might be a longer philosophical discussion, which I don't mind, it's a beneficial one. But in general, I didn't define friend. I left it open. And I wanted, this is just hearing your thoughts. We're not talking about permissible, impermissible. We're just talking, I want to see, like, should I befriend LGBT? So permissibility, as you were saying, Rami, that has a much different definition and different style of scope, because that would be a fiqh discussion where we'll say this is halal, this is haram. But even further back, philosophically speaking, you do got to define what a friend is. So a friendly acquaintance, does that mean I'm going to say hi to them, say salam to them? Will I pass my stapler when they can't find theirs? Probably, right? Still do these things. Will I invite them to my birthday party? Will I invite them to my wedding? Will I, go into business with them? That's like a different category. And then like my best friends, right? My closest do or die, the people that I think about that are closest invitees to everything and whatnot. I'm not going to define any of those categories. I'm just trying to leave it in general because, it's 9:30 and I don't want to drag for too long and I want to get some of these other questions. Sorry, I know some of you guys have input, but let me just give my input, then we'll move on to the next one, then we'll have like a shorter, general discussion at the end. So I'm not going to define friend in general, but the idea here is like similar to what you were saying earlier. Remind your name, Akhi? Dawood, sorry I forgot. It's like Dawood was saying, which is, I'm going to look at the influence on my religiosity, on my spiritual upbringing or my spiritual condition. If that's the overall net positive, I can maintain this relationship. If it's net negative, this relationship has to change or get denounced. So, am I influencing him or is he influencing me? Besides the interactions themselves, are they halal or not? If I'm looking at between genders, like man and woman. Which comes to the next question, for example, can I show him my hair? Let me ask the sisters that. Let me take their, can a homosexual man see your hair? Yeah, their sexual preference has no bearings on the ruling, right? The ruling is your hair is not supposed to be seen by a non-mahram man, by definition of them being non-mahram, not by definition of their attraction to you or yours to them, right? That's not something that's included here. So gender norms like touching, like being alone, all of that applies and should not be disregarded just because they have same-sex attraction. So the friendship, just going back to that quickly, depends on the level of influence, and this is what you should determine with all of your friends, and the amount of interaction. You might have a colleague at work that you're mandated to interact with and be friendly with. That's a lot different than a friend that I'd willingly go out with and we'll have lunch and we'll talk about ideas and tell me about your pet dog or whatever, right? So that's a completely more detailed, intimate reaction I most likely will not have with just anybody. This is where you want to be more careful. Do you want to be like this person? Do you want to be like they are financially, spiritually, emotionally, the way they are with their family? If the answer is no to all of that, why are you their friend? Just because they make you laugh? Is them making you laugh a worthy sacrifice compared to everything that I just said? That your relationship with your parents will look a little, it doesn't have to be exact, but look a little bit more like theirs. Your relationship with money will be a little bit more like theirs. Your relationship with hygiene will be a little bit more like theirs. Are you okay with that? If the answer is absolutely not to all of that, why are you being their friend, right? So, same thing here. It's not unique to LGBT. It's to any type of vice or negative characteristic that we see. What about, should I support attacks on them? So everyone would say absolutely not. I don't think anyone would say, especially in a public gathering. Private, they might voice different opinions. But especially in public gathering, most people say, no, attacking them is wrong. But when there's news that someone of them has been attacked or that you see it somehow in a video or whatever, most people I've seen, to be honest with you, Muslims, obviously I'm speaking about, they express a very weird, sinister level of like, vile, like, yeah, awesome. This gay person got beat up. It's not how it works in Islam. Right? We don't express interest or joy at other people's misfortune or physical violence. Especially when no one's being helped. Some physical violence, someone might be helped, like meaning before you say Muhammad's unhinged wacko. Somebody's stealing something from somebody, then they get clocked, for example. Maybe not the best conclusion, but would I feel super bad for him? No. Shouldn't have stole. That's what I mean, like not all violence is the same. But with that being said, this particular person being bullied very often in very heinous ways, being beaten to a pulp, is a bloody mess. What does that have? What does this context have that agrees with our Sharia? Doesn't, right? So it's very important to not just take these answers that I'm sharing in this discussion I'm having at face value. These are real issues that the Muslim community needs to have and to discuss because they're handling these things wrong. Go ahead, brother, Dawood.
So there's a hadith called in Sunan Abi Dawud. It said, if you see a person doing the same thing as people of food, kill them. So it's like the punishment of doing those actions is like execution. It's like quick clear. So is this something like we should do?
Anything in Islam about capital punishment, or not even capital punishment, punishment in general, is being spoken to on a government level, not an individual one. So anything that's about punishment is on a government level that must be handled with a due process of law that Islam has. So even if I saw someone committing zina, I would not be able to hold them and get them punished. I'd be able to report them to the law, and it's a process that gets started. So, in this regard, the act of homosexuality, homosexual sexual interaction between two males, penetration, is punishable by execution. That's true. At face value, that sentence is true. There still has to be a due process, there has to be witnesses. They differed. Is it 4 witnesses? Is it 2 witnesses? And so on and so forth. Does that answer the question? Yeah. No. No, it would not. Yes.
So you were mentioning earlier when you were talking about Sharia that how that basically like those countries they shouldn't go straight to just like, oh, if you're gay just like kill them all, you know, like all
Not they shouldn't. That doesn't happen.
that doesn't happen. But you said afterwards that later when the
They also shouldn't, but I'm saying like that was the main point I was trying to say.
but you said I just want to understand because later you said later when this society is more like you know I don't know what the word is, I guess reform.
Mhm.
Then it's okay to add like death penalties to certain stuff. So like at what point would that be? And also like what happens with the case of like, for example, like in the United States, for example, let's pretend that somehow we turn into a Muslim country, right? In some hypothetical that I can only dream about.
I mean, we're halfway there. Mamdani won the primary, right? So it's like,
But how about the case for foreigners that come in? They also have to now follow those laws, even though they come in from a completely different culture. Because since America's such a mixing pot, right? Just like as an example.
yes. So it's a little bit of a far question with the amount that needs to get done, legally speaking, emotionally speaking, spiritually speaking, before we can get to a conclusion like that. But the short answer is, Islam doesn't hold people accountable without due process. Not just due process of law, but due process of education as well. So if people have no way of finding out about these laws and being properly educated about them, then implementing them is like one of the last things that Sharia looks at. It looks at like the overall societal condition as well. So if we brought this punishment on, everyone here is Muslim. They've been Muslim for 500 years. The law for stealing, the penalty for stealing has been cutting off the hands for hundreds of years. But here people their grasp of the law is very poor, and it's been a financial circus for the last decade. The Sharia judge may come in here and say, forget cutting off hands for now. We got a lot of work to do just to reset the culture. So that has happened in our history. Forget generations later, that happened in the time of Umar, where he said, forget the punishment for now. There needs to be a cultural shift because people are starving because of whatever. So it's not black and white. That's like my short answer. So especially when it comes to capital punishment, flogging, cutting off hands, execution, there's such a rigorous system and due process that must be fulfilled first before we get anywhere near there. So the idea that that Ruqayya was sharing earlier, not only is this image, my whole point in that, by the way, is the image that they're portraying about the Middle East or Muslim countries is so hilariously false that it should not even be entertained. Like, oh, you're LGBT and you're advocating for Palestine. Go see what they would do for you to do in Palestine or Egypt. Nothing is the answer. You'd most likely just live your life, like not too different than here.
Chickens advocating for KFC is the argument that always hear.
Say it again.
Chickens advocating for KFC is the argument I've always heard in relation to.
Yeah, they'll try to. So they rely on buzzwords like that. They rely on the shock factor, that they'll tell the LGBTQ crowd, you are chickens who are advocating for KFC if you're voting for pro-Palestine. Just trying to package it in this very difficult to process package, and forcing everyone on a defensive they don't need to be in. But anyway, yeah. They just want to, shut you down with as little argument as possible. They're relying on the fact that you will very likely not know how to answer or not be prepared. And, the squeaky, what is it, squeaky wheel gets the grease. As long as they just don't shut up and nonstop, they know that it'll get the attention and have a good chunk of the effects that they want. Lastly, or two of them, should I use their pronouns? Sisters, should you use the required pronouns that you were asked? Call me, Z. You just say their name? What if I tried that once and then I got stuck? Like, I remember which pronoun I said. I don't think it was right. But you're naturally gonna, I think, I said that to myself too. I barely interact with this. And the rare occasion that I do interact with it, I'll just use the pronoun. You forget. At least for me, it didn't work. I ended up forgetting, probably used the wrong one. It didn't cost me anything. Yeah, Ruqayya. Is that the response to them asking you for your pronoun? So what is hi, my name is pronoun, him, her, or whatever. What is yours? You say it's what you think it is? I don't know. If you did that to me, I'd probably be annoyed right off the bat. Like, why you just answer the question? No, I hear you. Um, it's too late. I already judged you. But what's it called? I don't think there's anything wrong with saying like what your normal pronouns are. Like there's no reason to absolve yourself from this. When this first came out, when it was still new, a lot of people said like, "Oh, I don't entertain this. I don't engage in it." That seemed to be like something that people relied on in the beginning. Now that by itself you could lose your job, right? That statement by itself is a dangerous one to your career. So when something is actually costing you your career or your safety, it's okay to engage in it, especially if it's not strongly, you're not like, bow to an idol. And even if you were to bow to an idol to save your life, would that be okay? Yeah. That'd be fine. So, but now your life's not in danger, but you're also not bound to an idol. So what's at stake here is a lot less. So in those situations, if it's going to cost you your job, and cost you your job doesn't mean they say, hey, by the way, sweetie, say this, you're going to get fired. That's not how they do it, right? It's most likely you're going to find out after the fact that this cost you your job. So if you feel that this is going to cost you your job, cost you your position, then that's fine. You engage in it as is. You call them whatever. Because it's not worth this risk. Islam doesn't mandate you lose your job over this. It's not that deep, as you guys say, right? There's not as much at stake here. In some other situations, it might be, right? Let's say now you're the teacher of children. Now it's a little bit more. There's a little bit more at stake here, where you're teaching an entire generation, and then this will be determined now by what stance can you take. Can you absolve yourself without losing your job? Can you find another job? Now we're gonna start allocating or analyzing all these different facts before we tell you what to do. But the default is, if it's going to cost you anything, you just use them. No, it's not a hill to die on. Even to say I don't engage in this, be like, what do you want me to call you? Whatever. Just because it's not a hill to die on in terms of losing your job, losing your career. If there's nothing at stake, then you're free to, then you definitely should not engage in it if you can. The last thing that I'll mention for going to you guys is when it comes now to celebrations at work and school and solidarity in politics. When it comes to solidarity in politics, if the greater picture we agree on, and that's what is the subject at hand, then we can join forces. If the subject at hand we disagree on, or is significant enough, then we can't join forces, right? That's the basic answer. So if they're protesting for in solidarity with Palestine, do we agree on that? Yeah. The fact that there's a LGBTQ flag up there, does that nullify the validity of the entire protest? Not at all. Does that nullify the fact that I'm standing by them? No. The event itself, what does it have to do with LGBT? Nothing. It's about Palestine. If it has to do with equal rights for all, do I believe that anybody should be beaten up in the streets or should be physically singled out because of any belief they have whatsoever? No, I don't. I don't believe that's something that Islam advocates. I can stand for that cause. If it's about, this convoluted, unclear message about love and equality and love is love and now you can tell when it's getting weird, right? Then would I attend this event? Would I be holding the banner out front? Would I give a speech in it? Probably not. What if when they come to you and they say, you don't reciprocate justice? You want us to stand for your cause, and you don't want to stand for justice for us. Why do you stand for justice only when it's in your favor? Why are you a hypocrite? Someone different. Let's get different people. Someone who's freaking out now. How are you going to demand that if we're human beings and we care about children, we care about justice, we have to come protest for you? And then when we ask the same thing, you say, oh, no, sorry, you're LGBTQRS. Yes, Rami.
I can say what you said. Why are you protesting for your own benefit? Why are you protesting against others that we will protest for you too? It's not a trade deal.
That's not why I protest. I'm there both times. I was there both times. You're the one who wasn't.
Why are you coming in with an expectation that now we have an obligation to support you too? We're protesting for our own thing, right? So it doesn't mean that our opinion changes on yours. Yeah, we agree. Equal rights, sure. We have no doubt about that. But once
Add one of these for good measure. No, it's good. I'm joking. It's not aggressive. But you could always tone up the aggression. Like, why not? No, it's spot on. No, you're exactly on point, which is justice, just like you said, justice is not reciprocated. You either believe in it or you don't. So if I don't believe what you're doing is justice, so I'm not there for that reason, and you're not going to come to mine because I didn't come to yours, not because you don't believe it's just, then you're the one who's not standing up for justice. I'm actually still pretty solid. I'm consistent. You're the one who's not. Anything else? You done? No, it's good. So we don't reciprocate justice. You're absolutely right. That's actually the problem. You are. I'm not. I don't believe what you're saying is justice. If I did, I would be there. Yeah, Ruqayya? Would you do what? They might say yes. A rhetorical, they might answer, yeah, I would be there. And it kind of brings you back to square one. I find like with a lot of these arguments, which I've been trying to approach this whole topic with, was that, one, don't get stuck in the defensive all the time. Two, reject paradigms that people present to you as if they're truth. A lot of times that, you didn't even notice that you're accepting this premise to be true and you're defending against it when the real simplest answer was, who said I agree with that? Right? So, for example, this example right here, who said I agree that this is a just cause? First of all, who said that I wouldn't be there by your side? I would be there by your side. You would? Yeah. But isn't Islam against homosexuality? Well, I don't believe in it as an action. I wouldn't promote it. But if this is a protest for your equal rights and or against, your people physically attacking you, I would be there. So now it completely changes the narrative. It shifts how we're speaking. And we're not trying to like fish for points and how can we get everybody to love us. I'm trying to be morally, logically consistent as a Muslim. That's the point of all this. This is all about me. It has nothing to do with others. I want to be morally, logically consistent in all of my views so that way I'm not confused in my life. I'm never interacting with Allah or His Prophet ﷺ or Islam or the Quran or my fellow Muslims from a paradigm of confusion, which is something that I've grown up seeing with the practicing Muslims, with everybody. That your primary methodology of interacting with Allah, with His Messenger ﷺ, with the Quran, with Islam is a perspective of confusion. And that just doesn't make any sense. You're supposed to believe this with conviction, with certainty, enough that you're willing to die for it. How's that possible when you have no idea about anything? Right? When every single question is like, well, I know it's haram, but I don't know why. I know we're not supposed to, but I don't know how to explain it. I know that this isn't right, but I can't tell you what is. If that's like the default of our religious commitment, that's like a very scary place to be.
Yeah, because if you go to them and say, we're going to make a dawah for Islam, they're going to say the same thing to you.
Yeah. You don't sound like you know why you're doing it. You don't sound like you believe like it's the most true, so why would I do what you want over what I want? That's what it sounds like to these people. But it's not the case at all when you break it down in this fashion. So it's not as confusing as it looks, is it? It's pretty consistent. It's straightforward. You can have this with a friendly smile on your face. No, I respect you as a person. I respect your right to decide whatever you want. God created you with it. I don't believe that this is a permissible way of exhibiting sexuality because everything that we just said here. And you can have that back and forth without making it this very aggressive us versus them kind of point of view. With also saying that I do view this as something that is abhorrent, meaning it's dangerous, it's vile, it's evil, it's going to harm society, it's going to harm children, it is negative for society overall. I have no problem saying all of these things and then I'm comfortable explaining them piece by piece without getting stuck in these pitfalls. We have 5 more minutes. If anyone